All right. Looks like we are live. And let me see here. Do a little quick. All right, we're good. Sound is good. So, welcome everybody to this next installment of the nonsense that is Hydee Soto deciding to throw away her entire career, or frankly, what little was left of it anyway, in basically for the utter admiration and whatever financial support that she is getting from Scientology. This is one of a many part series where I explain to you exactly how in the last year that the current Los Angeles city attorney, Hydee Feldstein Soto, has utterly wrecked her own reputation, her own image, and frankly even upset some of her core base to really put just a terrible, terrible taste in the mouth of the public, both from her very staunch supporters as well as those that absolutely hate her guts, actually caused them to hate her even more. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to walk through a brief timeline and explain it to you step by step exactly how she's done this to herself and exactly why I believe she might be doing this. And all of this, by the way, comes at such a very fascinating point in time because, wouldn't you know it, the upcoming year is actually election season. It's election season for Hydee, and it's election season for Mayor Karen Bass. We have two of the biggest clowns in Los Angeles right now running for re-election. And the funniest part is for Hydee's office, okay, where she is the city, she presides as a city attorney, a elected position. And by the way, if you don't know what the city attorney's office does, they are the go-to counsel, aka the law firm for the city of Los Angeles. So whenever the city gets sued, or if the city is trying to enforce statutes like, for example, environmental laws, the city attorney's office, meaning all the deputies in that office, are the lawyers for the city of Los Angeles. They're the ones that defend the city. They're the ones that defend city officials like the council members or the mayor from any sort of litigation, except, interestingly enough, when criminal proceedings come up against particular officials within the city. At that point, it's up to those officials to figure it out. But for all other matters, the city attorney's office handles that litigation. And the city attorney's office also, interestingly enough, handles criminal prosecution cases for the state. In particular, the city attorney's office specifically prosecutes just misdemeanor cases. It's a agreement between the district attorney's office and the city attorney's office, whereby Hydee and her deputies, and just generally speaking, the entire city attorney's office prosecutes misdemeanor cases. And so that's the background, right? That's the backdrop. That's sort of a little 10-second spiel on just exactly what the city attorney's office is. Many people don't actually know that. They don't understand that they don't just do criminal prosecution cases of misdemeanors, but they also all do various civil litigation to defend the city. So whenever somebody sues the city, either in federal court or in state court, the city attorney's office is the one that actually litigates all of those matters on behalf of the city. Not only that, but the city attorney's office actually sits deputies at each and every city meeting. So all the city council meetings, all the various committees, all the various commissions, you actually have a deputy from the city attorney's office sitting at all times at each of those meetings where they're supposed to monitor for violations of the law and procedure. So that can be things like if decorum is not met, for example, where they don't have enough staff to actually move forward with the meeting, then the city attorney deputy, as well as the office itself, is responsible for enforcing the law to say you cannot proceed with this meeting at this time. You simply have to, for example, in that case, call for a next meeting if there's not enough people for decorum. They're also there to oversee that a motion gets introduced in the proper fashion and that it's agreed upon, and that the vote is taken to a majority consensus rather than just a minority, and that the next step of that motion is moved according to law and not just taken as automatically passed just because a vote passes, depending on the city's charter as well as various other state laws and federal laws. And when the city is also looking to have a mayor put out a new policy or a new program, the city attorney's office is the one and the only one to actually get involved with litigating all of the contracts between the city and businesses. For example, when it comes to real estate deals, if the city is giving up a chunk of land, say to a school or a nonprofit, the city attorney's office is the one actually reviewing every single ounce, every single aspect of that contract. Everything from negotiations to revisions to suggestions for new proposals, the whole shebang. That is all the responsibility and under the direct purview of the city attorney's office. And at this point, you might be asking yourself, wow, that's a crap load of responsibility. How is it that they are able to even continue with such a big undertaking? And who the hell oversees the city attorney's office if they conduct any misconduct? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because the sad answer is there really is no oversight. The only true oversight that there exists is not even an oversight to begin with. In fact, the only real oversight that exists is people coming forward and suing the city, or in a land of rainbows and unicorns, actually it's supposed to be the district attorney's office that prosecutes misconduct and other illegal activity by the city attorney's office, including the city attorney herself and her deputies, as well as staffers, right? The actual officials within the city government of Los Angeles. That is actually the responsibility of the district attorney to prosecute people in the city, as well as the city attorney's office, for their wrongdoings, for their misconduct, for their crimes, and so forth. And so that's really the backdrop of what and how the governance structure of the city of Los Angeles works. And with that in mind, now I'm going to go back to that, explaining that timeline I mentioned, showing exactly step by step how Hydee Feldstein Soto, the current presiding city attorney, has utterly decimated her reputation, her career, and any sort of goodwill she had by running political favors for Scientology with the primary intent to suppress their First Amendment rights, all really in an attempt to harass them. Where I've been a victim of that selective and malicious prosecution. I'm going to tell you about some other people who have also been victims. And I'll tell you a little bit about Hydee's divorce case, where this same pattern of maliciously, frivolously, and selectively prosecuting people is just something that she just can't help but do. It's just something about acting not in goodwill, not in good faith, that comes natural to Hydee. No matter where she is, no matter what litigation she's involved with, whether it be a divorce case that she dragged on for several years, especially in a situation where there was no children involved, and she was found actually to be behaving in a contemptuous manner and was actually sanctioned $250,000 for it. This is the pattern. This is the history. This is the behavior. This is the MO of Hydee Feldstein Soto. It is simply just who she is. And frankly, she's an utter poison to the city. She is the type of person that enables the sort of maliciousness and the utter failure of the various policies and programs set forward by Karen Bass, as well as various other officials that she refuses to prosecute, and countless other cases, in fact, that people have come to her for the hope of criminal prosecution, but never actually following up with any of it. And I'm going to talk about that too, where we actually found several people coming forward with similar cases that are related to the Wendell case. And if you guys don't know what the Wendell case is, I'll give you a brief overview of that too. But I've got a list here just to make it easy on the eyes, follow through, help anybody that wants to review on their own afterwards. And I'll go through the timeline from beginning to today, spanning about a year to a little over a year, close to a year and a half now, of the utter shenanigans and nonsense that Hydee Feldstein Soto has done. And now, unfortunately, with the moron in charge of the district attorney's office, Nathan Hockman, it just seems like this tyrannical trio, as I call him, is heading further and further down the path of stupidity, incompetence, and frankly just bankrupting the city with high levels of liability payouts, all because they just can't help but break the law. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and go through this list here, starting way back actually in 2023, whereby the LAPD Public Information Office, PIO office, actually issued a public statement outright designating and labeling anybody that ever had the audacity to criticize and live stream and videotape Scientology, and this is back where it was still at the info center over on Hollywood Boulevard. They issued a statement declaring the protesters, like William Gu, Jessica Palmadessa, Confident Chris without a Hellcat, as quite literally, in their own words, as part of a criminal gang, and they did so at Scientology's behest. And some history you need to understand when it comes to the Hollywood division is that for years, for 4 years, they actually had a kiosk inside of their station designated for a Scientology recruiting, as a Scientology recruiting tool. No other religious institution ever had their own personal private kiosk inside of a police station, particularly the Hollywood one, where they could quite literally recruit as for their institution. But yet the high levels of favoritism unfortunately don't end there. That's just the start of it. But that is what happened around December 2023, where the PIO office released a statement declaring them as violent criminals. So that's the track, the pattern that LAPD, and the start really of that incestuous relationship between the LAPD and eventually what you'll see as the city attorney's office going after people that dare to not only protest, but particularly in this case, have the audacity to stand on a public sidewalk and exercise their First Amendment right to film. And so that marked a total war. And sadly, as you'll see, the story here on in just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's all by Hydee's personal doing. I mean, the fact that she continues down this track of doing political favors, all politically motivated, and knowing that the things brought before her desk are all meritless, but yet doing it anyway, it's just a pattern that you'll eventually see. So that's December 2023. Fast forward to June 2nd, 2024, You have an incident over by Fountain Avenue over at the Blue Building where Michael, the significant other of Serge, is actually what I believe is unlawfully arrested, where the LAPD sergeant that was present on the scene falsely claimed that Michael assaulted the sergeant when Michael never did. Michael happened to be nearby the sergeant and extended a hand out uh, as a gesture to try to get his attention. And immediately, Michael was arrested, ganged up by the various LAPD officers, all of which, by the way, were never actually wearing any body worn cameras. Interestingly enough, all of them, including the sergeant, not a single one had any body worn camera at that scene on that day. There was no wrongdoing on Michael's part. It was a completely peaceful event where people were busking, people were cooking food, people were just hanging out, and this particular LAPD sergeant went and unfortunately also caused caused injury to Michael's shoulder, and I believe dislocate his shoulder when he just had surgery. I just believe, if I remember correctly. So that happened on June the 2nd, where he gets unlawfully arrested. They take him out, and the charge that they're trying to go after him at that point was going to be on assault on a peace officer. He's held for 3 days and threatened with charges. Fortunately for Michael and Serge, the community is able to raise money for them. They get an attorney, and unfortunately, still, after going through that process, as they say, the process is the torture. They walk away, luckily, with Michael being released and no charges brought before him, but not to say that he walked away clean. He walked away with bodily injury. He walked away with having to go through that incredibly traumatic experience, and ultimately having to cough up dough for an attorney. And so, the city attorney's office, by the way, is the one that was going to prosecute that particular case. And the problem with it is that Hydee has this pattern of prosecuting cases regardless of how weak the evidence is. She'll do it just for the sake of doing it, and she has no shame in her game. Now, I want to address something that often comes up when it comes to prosecution of cases. People bring up this whole idea of discretion, and while the city attorney's office as well as the DA's office do have discretion on the cases they prosecute, they also have a legal obligation to make sure that the cases brought before them actually have legitimate standing, actually have legitimate probable cause, and that the sufficiency of the evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt, rather than just taking political cases, particularly with Michael, with the intent to harass and suppress their First Amendment rights, for not to not allow them to be there at, whether it be the Blue Building, whether it be the Info Center, Celebrity Center, and so forth. That time between December to June, December 2023 to June 2024, there's a whole series of other events that took place where other protesters were also getting unjustly arrested and being threatened with charges, and many of which also being given charges. One of those was actually Jay, who did get issued a misdemeanor charges, and ultimately being pressured into an absolutely stupid deal because Hydee, again, loves running political favors for this criminal racket known as Scientology. And if you don't know her background, you can actually get a great glimpse of Hydee's background to really get into the mindset of what causes somebody like Hydee Feldstein Soto to act this way. And we're so lucky to have not only her divorce case, but a another case brought forward for um, for getting unjustly fired by a woman named Michelle McGinnis, who served as a city attorney deputy for about 30 years. And in her tenure, he was actually Michelle McGinnis was actually promoted to the head of the criminal branch, where she was overseeing prosecutions of criminal cases. That was both to individuals as well as to corporations. What we learned, thanks to her divorce case with Peter Gregora, as well as Michelle McGinnis, who ultimately became a whistleblower and sadly was fired as a result of it, we learned that during her very short-lived tenure as director, Michelle McGinnis had exposed a whole series of internal memos as well as a pattern of Hydee where she was deliberately going after people that were essentially criticizing her political backers and then not going after ones that her political backers told her to not go after, particularly real estate companies, as well as other financial companies that have direct ties with the serious billions of dollars of levels of fraud regarding the homelessness programs that the city of Los Angeles is notorious for, whether it be the Inside Safe program, whether it be the Alliance program, or the Roadmap agreement, and so on and so forth, where the city of LA for years, whether it be things like the Skid Row Trust Fund and various other fraud committed by the city of LA in conjunction with various other government agencies at the state level being LAHSA, and then at the county level as well, outright committing fraud, using public funds to line the pockets of personal interests. And you see very quickly, thanks to these trailblazers, that we wouldn't have much of this information on the public record, but because of their tenacity, because of their resiliency, and because of their willingness to fight for what's right, to fight for justice, we do have this information. We have it both from the Alliance, which is a coalition of small boutique law firms standing up for the people, suing the city in federal court over their negligence of not meeting the promises they said for helping alleviate homelessness and poverty. And again, to the Michelle McGinnis case, we can see just what makes somebody like Hydee Feldstein Soto tick and how they got to be to where they are today. And part of the reason for how Hydee got to be where she is today is we can see from the Michelle McGinnis case that she actually worked, according to that case, to a very well-known, and sadly not for a good reason, but a very well-known financial accounting company called Arthur Andersen. The most important takeaway for the Arthur Andersen accounting firm is that it's literally the same law firm, same accounting firm used by the Enron Corporation. The Enron Corporation, if you don't know what that is the corporation that was known for committing and was actually convicted of the first time a corporation is convicted of committing financial crimes. Okay? Crimes. And they're held to account for it, and individuals within that corporation are also held to account for it. And in internal memos, thanks again to the Michelle McGinnis case, we can actually see that Hydee Feldstein Soto outright says to her deputies and to Michelle, quote, "We do not prosecute corporate defendants," meaning that we will not go after anybody that is a political backer of mine, which the name of the game in LA is any real estate developer, right? Land and real estate is the name of the game in Los Angeles. We will not go after corporate defenders. Hydee has a policy, as a tactic, as a strategy, that she will not criminally prosecute other officials, She will not criminally prosecute other companies. She will not do it. And that is ultimately one of the biggest blessings that we've been able to gather from the Michelle McGinnis case. And most interesting about that case is actually the fact that Michelle McGinnis won the fight to actually have Hydee Feldstein Soto deposed. Now, it's a private deposition. Whether that deposition will actually be released publicly still remains to be seen. They're still holding on their next case conference where they have a status hearing, I believe, in the next month or two. Unfortunately, it's some of this stuff just takes time, but she did win a deposition against Hydee, which is frankly unheard of. Besides some of the trial transcripts that we have as part of Heidi's divorce proceedings, this is the next best thing. And the best part is that it's related directly to her position in office as the city attorney. So that is yet again another backdrop, another piece of information, some more context to understand just who Hydee Feldstein Soto is and her long-standing history of doing anything that her political backers want at any cost, especially and no cost is too high, including her own reputation and setting her entire career on flames for helping prosecute people like Jay, myself, and countless others with meritless cases. So moving back to the timeline here really quick. We just talked about June the 2nd with Michael getting unlawfully arrested, getting threatened with charges, but ultimately prevailing, but sadly walking out with grave bodily injury as part of that that excessive use of force by the sergeant that handled him. The same day, interestingly enough, June the 2nd, 2024, is the same day that the Scientology Sea Org slaves actually start putting up the barricades, the stakes and the netting all along Catalina Street. The video footage that I showed yesterday, and there's tons, as well as other video footage that I have from that date, you can clearly see that several people were involved in removing those stakes and netting. But none of those people were ever charged. So June the 2nd is the first ever time that we see the stakes and netting come up, but nobody ever gets charged for removing them. Even more interesting that day, June the 2nd, 2024, there was the email I showed you yesterday, obtained through a CPRA thanks to Audit LA, of Lieutenant Gary Walters verifying that Scientology high-level officials were in fact contacted and informed by the LAPD that what they were doing with the netting was in fact illegal, and that they need a permit for it, and that Scientology never had such a permit, and that the LAPD called Scientology's bluff, whereby Scientology was saying that on June the 2nd, Scientology members, aka their Sea Org slaves, were assaulted, and the LAPD said no, they weren't, and that they watched the whole thing and can definitively see that no such thing happened. And that is such a major win for the LAPD to go from the December 2023 PIO office issuing a statement that all protesters against Scientology are part of a criminal gang. Now fast forward to June 2024, LAPD saying, screw you guys, no wrongdoing, all is good, leave them alone, and stop breaking the law. So that's all on June the 2nd. You had an arrest, you had the illegal nets put up, and you had LAPD telling them what they were doing was illegal. Fast forward to June 10th, 2024, and then this is where you have the expansion of the installation of all the very large, heavy 4,000 plus pound planter boxes all along Fountain, all along L. Ron Hubbard Way. where they damaged the sidewalk. And you can even, it's at this same time period that we actually have Audit LA explaining how, as a result of all the damage caused to the sidewalks from the planters, that she unfortunately ended up getting stuck as a result of it. Fast forward to just within the week there, June the 16th, is where there's video footage that I capture, as well as other people showing yet again people removing the netting that is still illegally there. And this is where we have the first two ever LAPD officers actually show up and try to harass people and intimidate them. And thanks to the discovery through my case, we learned that they were not contacted by any formal channels, and no record of any official calls were placed, but in fact they had received private calls where they had dispatched certain officers in particular. And in this case, it was Galindo and Garcia, via private call, where those officers were challenged and confronted on their false statements, where the officers were falsely stating that permits had existed, which they did not, and that they were going to show the permits, which they never did. And that same night is when those same two officers, Galindo and Garcia, came back a second time, threatening to arrest them, and unlawfully, might I add, by saying that if anybody from the Scientology side requests a PPA, that they automatically have to execute it as part of an arrest, which they don't. That's not how a private person arrest works. That's what a PPA stands for. And they don't. And so that was all videotaped, challenged, and those officers eventually left the scene. And they clearly stated after that, no wrongdoing, no crime, no detainment, all is good. Fast forward later in time on that same day, but in the afternoon, we have video of more netting removal by myself and other people on scene. And this time we get two other LAPD officers arriving on scene. And this is about 2 o'clock, 1 or 2 o'clock. And this is where we have Officer Barajas and Castro. Yet again, two other LAPD officers who got privately contacted to be on scene. There was no official record. Prosecutors admitted as such. And they were there for to serve the particular private interests of Scientology, again with the intent to harass and threaten. And the most interesting part is when these two officers, Castro and Barajas, showed up, they actually tried getting me to sign a completely bogus trespass letter, which I never did. And at first they came out with this attitude demanding, issuing directives that I had to sign it. And when I challenged them immediately on it, their tone immediately changed to say, well, actually, you don't have to sign it. And in fact, we're asking you to, but you don't have to. And it was clear as day on the letter that they were trying to execute on behalf of Scientology, which they can't even issue. They had solicited a trespass, which you cannot do for Scientology. They had solicited a trespass. But not only that, they tried giving the same workaround to say they had a permit for the netting. And again, they were challenged on it. And again, they never provided any proof and dropped that argument of the permit. No wrongdoing, no crime, no detainment, no arrest. Done deal. They left, tail tucked between their legs. All is good. Later that same evening on June the 16th, this is when approximately 5 p.m. Scientology PAC security guard, PAC standing for Pacific Area Command, Alexander Scott Irvin, goes to LAPD Northeast Station and files a report. And the specifics of the report is for vandalism. The most interesting part, as I mentioned yesterday, is within the hour of the report, a sergeant gets assigned the case, and immediately, mere moments of that, less than an hour of that after that, a specific LAPD detective from Northeast Division gets assigned to it. And this is where we find for the first time who the mole is on the inside at Northeast, right? Because at this point, Hollywood Division has sort of separated themselves away from actually trying cases and trying to get arrests, but Northeast has not relented just yet. This is the first time that we see the mole on the detective side over at Northeast, and his name is Ishmael Peinado. He immediately takes on this case, June the 16th. Fast forward just a week later, June 25th, okay, we have Northeast LAPD detective Ishmael Peinado creates his very first investigation report, which I showed yesterday, where he outright makes, knowingly, willingly, and deliberately, various false statements on the report. He makes up this completely bogus incident on his report, stating that I somehow had allegedly committed bodily injury directly to a Scientologist, and that I had directly threatened physical violence to a Scientologist, which I had never done on that day or ever at all, nor do I ever intend to. Interestingly enough, on this very first report, Peinado also directly admits that there is no such evidence at all of any sort of vandalism, of any sort of ownership of this material, and of it ever being even damaged. So what they're doing again on the June 25th report is showing in paper that the detective is lying and colluding with Scientology to perpetuate these lies, because he even admits that on this particular report, he didn't even follow up. Okay, he didn't even follow up with Alexander Scott Irvin. So he writes these things on his investigation report, never actually following up on any investigation whatsoever, not doing a single lick of investigation. And on this first investigation report, he never even mentions the interactions of the 4 LAPD officers at 3 different moments in time that occurred on June the 16th. Not once mentioned in this first report. Fast forward, July the 5th, 2024. This is where Detective Ishmael Peinado creates a second investigation report, and this will be his final investigation report, where yet again he deliberately lies and says right on it again that I had allegedly committed physical violence and bodily injury to somebody and threatened violence directly to Scientologists. Never once happened at all. Never once happened during that time, during any other time, never would happen. As well as he continues to admit that there still exists no evidence of any sort. So again, this pattern of lying continues, and he leaves out, exculpatory information, which is the interaction of those 4 officers at those 3 different points in time. Not once in either the June 25 report or the July 5th report, and I just noticed I had a typo there. In neither of these reports does Ishmael ever bring up the fact that those officers showed up on scene and said no wrongdoing, no arrest, no detainment, and admitted that there's no permit. Fast forward from July. Well, actually, one other thing I want to bring up there. Peinado is also known for having a history of falsifying police reports and making frivolous declarations for supporting the creation of an arrest warrant. So he tried getting an arrest warrant. It miserably failed. He was told to go kick rocks. And there's another case, Leola Johnson v. Robert Allen, that explains this in fantastic detail, how this is not the first rodeo that Ishmael Peinado has tried doing this on. July 12th, 2024. Hydee Soto goes and files a case having zero evidence, and the only air quotes evidence she has is a grossly falsified police report that doesn't even take into account the interaction with the 4 cops at the 3 separate times. So it's at this point, okay, that we have less than a month, about 3 weeks, and immediately a case is filed. Immediately. With zero evidence, admissions directly by the lead detective, admitting on 2 reports that there is no evidence supporting any of this. And yet she does it anyway, because it's a giant political favor that she's doing for Scientology. Okay. Fast forward to August 7th, 2024. The LA Board of Public Works, thanks to all of the comments and the repeat number of people showing up and making their voices heard, August 7th, 2024, the LA Board of Public Works officially declares that all the barricades that Scientology has on the public right-of-way are illegal and orders the immediate removal of all those barricades. Fast forward to August 15th, 2024, my arraignment. Fast forward to mid-March. There's a public event that Hydee goes up to speak on that's held by the Sherman Oaks Homeowner Association, where she's actually present as a keynote speaker. And I interview her about my case. And this is probably the biggest. There's been several points at the times at this part where Hydee has committed a lot of just very stupid and outright self-incriminating acts, but this one particularly takes the cake because basically, first of all, she's not supposed to ever talk about an active case to anybody, okay? She's just not supposed to. So that's strike number 1 on this particular day where I interviewed her. And she did. She did exactly that. She directly talked about my case. There was no question about it. Strike 2 against her on that day was that she admitted that the case had no merit, that it was not a priority, and that at best it would ever go to diversion. And so she strung along this case knowingly, willingly, and deliberately, and clearly it shows the political intent, the political motivation behind it to prosecute a case selectively and maliciously for a political favor for a backer. And especially now when she's running for office, the timing is perfect, right? The timing is absolutely perfect. And so that's the biggest fuck up that she has in this entire shit show. And then of course, fast forward to May the 2nd, 2025. And that should, and again, I have another typo there. That should actually be March 2025. But fast forward to May 2nd, March 2025. I'm acquitted of the charge, and the deal is, because Hydee's still such an absolute piece of shit, instead of incurring more costs to go to trial, they say, okay, we'll acquit the charge, and then you just take a you'll take a civil infraction for a loitering. That without any financial penalties or any conditions, and to be expunged. So that's the timeline of how we can see definitively Hydee dedicating whatever literal is left of her legacy and her career to the currently worst hated enterprise there is. Okay, this is the legacy, this is the path that she's chosen, and to do it of all the times to do this, by the way, she does it right at her re-election cycle. I mean, what an absolute moron for somebody to do all this right stinking in the middle of re-election. Holy shit. I mean, come on, Hydee. This is just some rookie shit, but you know, you're going to be held to account for it in a court of law. I promised you I would prosecute this, and I will. And I really look forward to it, but it's just what a shit show for somebody to just throw away whatever little dignity they might have had by running political favors for a well-known child trafficking cult. I mean, congratulations, Hydee. And that doesn't even end there, by the way, okay? The other aspect you need to know about Hydee is that we know definitively from high-level sources at the LAPD, if you remember back to about May 7th, 2024, where Hydee Feldstein Soto chose not to prosecute a case against very clearly what was to be at a bare minimum a misdemeanor indecent exposure against a guy that we colloquially call as Wendell, who showed up right in front of the Blue Building on Fountain Avenue, wielding a machete and exposing himself to a minor, and all that was caught on camera. There were several people there that were just enjoying themselves, busking on the sidewalk, enjoying music, hanging out with each other, and then this clearly paid Scientology agent shows up and starts threatening them with a machete, and then commits indecent exposure to a minor. Again, all caught on camera. Officers get called on the scene. They're from Northeast. They all refuse to execute a private person's arrest, and we have a verified high-level LAPD source that Hydee deliberately let that case go to have the statute of limitations expire. And then second of all, that the justification that they used to try to somehow, some way, for what they thought would make sense, and it frankly doesn't, but fucking of course Hydee would come up with some crazy shit like this. The justification was, well, because he was next to a tree when he was doing all this crazy fucking shit, it doesn't count. So let that sink in, right? Hydee will justify protecting child predators as long as they're agents of Scientology, unless, of course, the will of the people is so strong that they nonstop spam her office to take action. And it turns out that incident with Wendell, by the way, was not at all unique. Not at all unique, because in fact, in October, late October, around Halloween, October 2024, at a CPAB meeting over at Northeast Division, myself and Audit LA were there, and we heard public testimony from various other people who had been victims of similar other people committing indecent exposure at playgrounds, at schools, at public parks, to women and children, broad daylight. People reported at LAPD. LAPD then kicked the case up back to the city attorney's office, as they should, for consideration of prosecution. And what does Hydee do? In all of those incidents, and we heard from 3 people, if I remember correctly, at the CPAB event, which was the Community Police Accountability Board, we had from 3 different people, and these were people actually part of the board, interestingly enough. We heard from 3 different people that they came forward with such cases, and that Hydee would not prosecute any of them. She does not like going after child predators. Wouldn't you know it? It's a thing where she lets go of these cases to expire under the statute of limitations as for misdemeanors. She won't do her job. This is the legacy, this is the history that Hydee Feldstein Soto leaves behind. This is what she's decided to commit, whatever the rest of her career is, if you could even call it that. I just call it an absolute dumpster fire. Absolute shambles is what I call it. This is what she's choosing to do with herself. This is what Hydee is doing with the office of the city attorney, making an absolute mockery of the people of Los Angeles and not actually prosecuting any of the real criminals. Okay? That's the legacy of Hydee Feldstein Soto, and it's an absolute goddamn shame. And so with that, I'll leave you guys to it. I'll be back again. I'm planning to do these pretty much on a daily basis at this point, just exposing the absolute shit show that is the legacy of Hydee Feldstein Soto as the city attorney in the city of Los Angeles. So appreciate y'all. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out. Have a good night.